Hello, my name is Bill McDonald of the Charlotte County Libraries and History. Welcome to Author Talk. Edgar Allan Poe is the subject. Once upon a midnight dreary, as I pondered weak and weary. The first line of Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven. That poem is the only poem that I know where a professional sports team was named after a particular poem. Of course, the Baltimore Ravens, named after Poe's famous work. Poe's last years were spent in Baltimore. Edgar Allan Poe was born in 1809 in Boston. Both of his parents were actors. His father left the family when Poe was about 1 year old. Poe's mother, Eliza, came down with TB when Poe was about 2 years old and eventually died. Poe was taken in by the Allans, and that's where you get the name Allan, Edgar Allan Poe. That's A-L-L-A-N. The Allans were Francis and John Allan. They adopted Edgar, and they took him to Richmond. He lived there for a year or two, and then the family went over to England. So some of Poe's grade school education was spent in England. He excelled academically. The family moved back to Richmond, Virginia when Poe was about 12 years old. He not only exceeding academically, he was also quite the athlete. He once swam upstream in a river for about 6.5 miles. When it was time to go to college, Poe went to the University of Virginia, and he did well academically. Unfortunately, Poe's father, John Allan, did not give Poe enough money for classes and room and board. Consequently, Poe took to gambling and ran up about a $2,000 debt. Poe's father, adopted father, John Allan, did not give Poe any more money, and Poe dropped out of the University of Virginia. Still having that $2,000 debt, he enlisted in the Army under a false name. He went under the name of Edgar Perry. He excelled in the Army. He moved up the ranks, but he realized if he was going to pursue a military career, he might as well go to West Point. After leaving West Point for lack of funds, Poe published his first book of poetry, and he moved into his aunt's house. Aunt Mariah took Poe in. Poe got a job with the Southern Literary Messenger, and there Poe wrote some short stories, and he also became known as the Tomahawk Man for his blistering reviews of other writers. He did publish some short stories, including Premature Burial, The Fall of the House of Usher, and Murders in the Rue Morgue. Poe's short stories followed the main point of having one singular effect. So in The Fall of the House of Usher, we find that the whole house, or anyone in that house, decays, whether it's Roderick or Madeline. Madeline dies and rises from the dead, and her brother goes insane, and the house eventually crumbles. So it's that singular effect of a house being in decay and being haunted and somewhat possessed. Eventually, Poe marries Mariah's daughter, and her name is Virginia. And Virginia was only 13 years old when Poe married her. And she claimed to be older so they could legally get married. Unfortunately, Virginia also succumbed to TB when she was just 23 years old. And eventually also Poe's adopted mother, Frances Allan, also dies of TB. So the three main women in Poe's life, Frances Allan, Virginia Clem, who becomes his wife, and his original mother, all die of TB in their 20s. So that certainly affects his writing. Poe also wrote poems, and he believed that poems should have a musical quality to them. and they should convey beauty and the death of young women and tragedy as well. Poe did show signs of binge drinking when he suffered various tragedies or setbacks, and he did go into quite the drinking binge when his wife Virginia died. His poem "The Raven" became a sensation, and he would go to various literary salons and into people's homes, and he would recite The Raven. In fact, they even called Poe the Raven, and young boys would walk behind him making bird sounds, and he would turn around and make raven sounds to accompany their sounds as well. Poe's last work, Eureka, was a nonfiction work that explained the origins of the universe and how we arrive as human beings. In 1849, Poe went missing for 3 days. This is when he was in Baltimore. And he was later found outside of a tavern, and this tavern was used as a polling place. And he was disheveled, he was wearing someone else's clothes, and he was delirious. He was taken to the hospital, and he later died. Now, how he got in somebody else's clothes and was never really explained. After Poe died, some of the writers that he had criticized heavily wrote his obituary, and they exaggerated his drinking and gave Poe kind of an unfair take as far as his life and his accomplishments. Today, Poe is looked upon as a very influential writer. One of his stories, Murders in the Rue Morgue, was actually the template or the influence on Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes. Murders in the Rue Morgue is credited as being the first detective story, and his detective in that, Monsieur Dupin, is known as the template really for Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes. So in fact, mystery writers, the highest award a mystery writer can get is the Edgar Award, and that's named after Edgar Allan Poe. Edgar Allan Poe's short stories, his horror short stories, went on to influence writers such as H.P. Lovecraft, Stephen King, and even adventure and science fiction writers like H.G. Wells. His poems have influenced everyone from Walt Whitman to Baudelaire. And it's interesting to note that someone so influential that an NFL football team would be named after his poems, and that our modern horror writers credit Poe as being a strong influence. He died 10 years before the start of the Civil War, and yet we're still talking about him. Thank you.